Hey, it's Min Canada here. You are listening to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour, the place to be to learn about the latest and greatest stories of individuals with disabilities or individuals who are doing incredible disability rights and advocacy work. Today, we have the opportunity to welcome Brittany Déjean to our podcast show. She is the founder and CEO of AbleThrive. It is a platform for people with paralysis and their families. Brittany's father was paralyzed after a car accident when she was only 12 years old. And after seeing that it's possible to live a fulfilling life with a disability, she dedicated her life to making it possible for others to also be able to do so. She is a 2008 graduate of Harvard University. She has worked with disability communities in 5 countries, giving her a sense of the common challenges faced globally. She also works to debunk misconceptions associated with disability to develop the population of disability allies. She is a 2014 Echoing Green Global Fellow, a 2017 Global Good Fund Fellow, and was named on the 2017 Southeast Top 100 Social Entrepreneurs. Brittany Déjean, welcome to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to kick off with our first question, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced since your dad's accident?
Well, we actually had a pretty, obviously, like a spinal cord injury is a really difficult situation, and it was very difficult for our family, but we were very lucky to have access to really wonderful resources. I grew up near Philadelphia and has one of the top spinal cord injury hospitals in the country there. And so even though we had no idea what was going on or what to expect, it was 20 years ago. We had, my dad stayed in inpatient rehab for months. There was peer mentoring program. There's all this kind of support. And even though, again, it was challenging, we had this understanding that my dad still had a life ahead of him because we could see it in the form of other people who had come back to share their experiences. And so, yeah, that was, the awareness of that challenge, I guess, when I figured out later that not everybody had those kinds of resources, because it was already so hard. And so to imagine not having that kind of support is ultimately what got me where I am now.
How has losing your brother to the car accident impacted you and your family's life?
I can't really speak for the family. I think that's a question that could be probably a book. But in terms of my influence, that was obviously really difficult. But when I think now, kind of as an adult, when I think back on it, I think it taught me a lot about, the importance of living life to the fullest, which is actually one of the values baked into AbleThrive, and as I grew up older, I realized that, yes, I recognized that there was this gap in paralysis and spinal cord injury, and I wanted to help people in my family situation. But at the same time, I think as I've gotten older, the more I understand that some of that motivation also came from having lost my brother, and that I understood that, there are people who think that disability is a death sentence, or that, that people who get a spinal cord injury are better off dying. And so for my view of our circumstance being that we had, we lost someone and had a spinal cord injury, it's like, to me, there was no comparison. So it really did bother me when I understood how people thought that there was just no chance for a future, because really, like, for me, having the fact that, there was, the finality of death versus the opportunity to rebuild a life, albeit a very different one, or, still have to go through the changes and challenges. But, I could understand that better when it put things in perspective. That really affected me.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I can relate to some degree since I was adopted and abandoned as a toddler, as a 3, 4 year old, and losing, my whole family. But I can't even begin to relate, to that level, knowing absolutely that they're gone. At least in my case, there's a question mark. So yeah, what were the key resources that enabled your dad to thrive after the car accident and enabled him to live a productive and fulfilling life after becoming disabled?
Well, I mentioned some of this already, but I mean, the fact of where we lived, which was obviously like just luck that we happened to live where we did, put us in such close access to really, really phenomenal medical care and support and in the rehabilitation hospital. And again, the mentors, a lot of things that I think, at least from my perspective, I learned, we learned by seeing, right? So we learned that, people with my dad's mobility could do X, Y, or Z because someone showed up at the rehab gym and demonstrated X, Y, Z, without moving their fingers, or, you know, in ways that my dad was able to learn. And he's told me that as well. Again, like, I don't know from his perspective, but I know that, like, that's how my dad learned he could drive. It's not learned how he learned to drive, but it's how he learned that he had the ability to drive, because someone like him showed up at the gym with car keys around his neck. And those are the kinds of things that set a foundation. Now, that all being said, my dad is an incredibly, like, determined person who was ready to work and make things happen. So it was a combination of things, but certainly there was gratitude 100% on my part, and I think my whole family would say just that the support that surrounded us in the medical facilities was a great foundation for my dad to use, like, the elements of his character that made him, or to make the most of his determination, because he had more direction to put his energy, to make, the gains that he did and the accomplishments that he did after his accident.
Yeah, no, those resources are very much vital. So, how has dancing, I think I really enjoyed. I saw your guys' wedding, your first dance with your
Mm-hmm.
dad when you got married, and I found it very touching. I actually shed a few tears.
Oh.
How is dancing with an able-bodied person different from dancing with, somebody who is in a wheelchair?
Um,
So, what are the techniques and nuances?
oh yeah. So, I can't say I have that much experience. And I knew literally nothing going into it. It was first step was convincing my dad to do it with me. Second step was figuring out how the heck to do it. Um, uh, I guess, like, little things that I picked up when we were trying things out. And we actually worked with someone who did, like, mixed ability dance lessons, and she was amazing. She's roll call wheelchair dance in the New York area, actually. Her name's Diane DeCepolo, and she met with us and worked with us, and she helped me figure out, it was like a little bit trial by fire, but also she had good tips. So, like, my dad's fingers don't move, so, like, I have to grip, and make sure that I'm gripping for the two of us. Things that, keeping my arms. I mean, to be honest, I can't say that I've ever choreographed a dance with someone not in a wheelchair the way I did with my dad. So I'm not sure I can compare, but at least with my dad, there were certain ways that, like, my, the way that the physical movements of my body could help, like, stabilize the two of us, or how we could use the turning of the wheels, like the momentum of the wheels going back and forth. Um, yeah, so there was little things, but to be honest, like, on the obviously I didn't have more than one father-daughter dance again, so I can't really compare. But for me, like, sure, we thought about some of the logistics going into it, but then during it, thankfully my dad, I kind of just forgot everything. So dad helped me, like, remember what we were supposed to be doing. But really, because we were both in the moment too. And then it wasn't a wheelchair dance. We were just having that father-daughter dance, which was really all I wanted. and we found a way to make it not too technically complicated, because there are incredible wheelchair dancers who have all the tricks and training. We just needed to do what we could to have that moment, and it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, as I was watching the dance, I really appreciated how thoughtful you were because I saw the nuances being a wheelchair user myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, um, I knew that it wasn't just something that you just did it spontaneously. There was practice and there was training that went into that.
It's all credit to Diane. I mean, she did this. She does this all the time, and we were so basically. I had just put out a call through people we had started to collect in the AbleThrive network, because it was quite a number of years ago now, and there was another guy who I had known who was a wheelchair user who was already training to work on his father daughter dance with his daughter, and he's the one who connected us to Diane. So it was, I would say, it wasn't necessarily intuitive, but she really made it easy and gave us something that we could learn in a relatively short period of time, and not be thinking too hard, so that we could be sure that we were really enjoying the moment.
Yeah. No, you guys did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
I know that it really empowered me. Being in a wheelchair is very awkward to dance and very awkward to there is a certain confidence that you have to train yourself to have and exposure. So I'm glad you're so open about sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
So let's jump to AbleThrive. So it's a social enterprise, I understand. What can you tell us a little bit of how you got it started? How big is the team currently? How you're able to gain, momentum and grow it year by year?
Yeah, so I actually, my recognition of kind of the gaps in support resources after a spinal cord injury came about 12 years ago. And so really, I had the thought to use the internet to make this easier all the way back then. I was still in college. But yeah, so it's something I've wanted to do in some form for a long time. And that kind of evolved over time as the world changed and internet changed. And so a couple years ago, um, I had worked in the disability space for a little while in different ways. And then I thought, well, it's time to do it, time to do what I wanted to do. And so I set up, basically still, again, evolving from that original desire and passion that I had. And so set up the company, and then started basically leveraging the relationships that I've had, because it's been in the space for a while, and then trying to figure out how could we solve this problem, reassessing how back in 2006 and 7 I was thinking there wasn't a lot online, so thinking about putting stuff more. Back then it was about putting things online. Well, in the interim, things got put online without any effort, right? That just started happening. People started writing blogs, YouTubers started recording their lives. Content became a huge thing. So then, by the time we were working with AbleThrive, we're like, well, actually, the point isn't to put things online. The point is to, how are people supposed to know where all these things are online? And so then we started building relationships with organizations, companies, hospitals, and bloggers who are already putting content online. And by building relationships with them, we started curating them into AbleThrive posts, where we credited the source and backlinked it, kind of like the way things get picked up, news stories get picked up and all the outlets talk about them. And it's kind of got that, microphone effect, or you're amplifying what's the message. And so we looked at ourselves as, if we can help amplify some of these messages, but also consolidate them into one location, then the people with paralysis don't have to go, and their family members or whoever don't have to go to hundreds of websites on their own. And so that's something that we started doing that. And then maybe 2 years after that, just, spend time building up content. Then we realized also that, depending on how your body moves makes a big difference as to how you do things. And so we do have a mobility filter as well. So when users register for a free account, they can tell us their interests that we cover and the mobility of their arms, fingers, trunk, and legs. And then from that, we can give them a customized feed so that they don't have to, again, even sort through everything on our site. And so that the platform we have shared in 16 spinal cord injury hospitals. We have 3 people apart from me who work on different elements of AbleThrive in some capacity or another. We have a couple advisors who help us out with different things. And so that's how it's been for a couple years. And now we're digging a little bit deeper into new injuries and looking to educate people who are right at that early stage, and helping guide them to the information they need before they're at the point where they're ready to figure out how to travel or dance, which is some of the things that we've been curating over the last few years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I think it's amazing work, and definitely there's such a demand out there, especially as I see that you're reaching globally. So which leads me to the next question is that, I know you've worked with communities in 5 countries at least by now. What are these 5 countries and what are the differences and similarities when it comes to providing resources to individuals with disabilities, to people from different cultures
Yeah.
and different belief backgrounds?
So, obviously my exposure first started in the United States, and then, so what kind of woke me up to some of the problems, which was ultimately the inspiration for doing what I'm doing now, came from when I was studying abroad in China. And so China, I did a 1-month independent study project to explore the lives of people with disabilities. And it was an experiment. Like, I didn't know what to expect, but I figured there was some kind of connection through disability. And so that was the first international experience I had with disability. And what I found was, so long as, I told people about my connection via my dad, it really opened up a lot of doors that otherwise, it opened up trust. And for some of the people that I was able to connect with in China, I saw, again, more similarities than differences. And in terms of why people were excluded from society, there may have been different cultural reasons or cultural assumptions or sometimes religious beliefs that inform different things, but the end result was so similar, right? Like exclusion, feeling excluded from society, having trouble accessing buildings, having trouble getting a job. These things were all over the place. And then after college, I wanted to dig a little deeper. And so I spent time in Madagascar and Senegal. And I worked with people with disabilities in both of those countries. And again, it's different culture, different people, overlap in some but the cultural, again, foundation is 100% different. But again, same problems. People were fighting for their rights to be included, to be visible, to be appreciated. Some places there were still people being completely isolated in their homes or not getting educations. But again, I met incredible, advocates with disabilities in these places. And then more recently, up until the end of 2015, I lived in Singapore for a couple of years. And so working in Singapore, again, it's there was some overlap with some of the Chinese culture in Singapore to the Chinese culture I had observed in China. But from there, I've also, I visited Australia and New Zealand and working with, didn't spend quite as long there, but also, again, connecting with people with disabilities. And basically, again, there are differences, I find, but truly I feel that the similarities are stronger. And the common sense of exclusion, the common sense of, for whatever reason, being not, again, whatever the cultural reasons may be underlying some of the actions of the population or the exclusionary actions of the population, the end results were the same. And there was people fighting the same battles. And so that's part of me feeling well, the greater conversation about disability doesn't need to be in only one country. And also, obviously, I could bond with a lot of family members. And one of the first really close relationships I had in China was with a host brother who also had a disabled dad, and I hadn't no, regardless of the culture, I hadn't met at that point in my life many people who had a dad with a disability. So I mean, it's just and he was a farmer in rural China, and I was a American college student, and we could bond over what that was like. So I mean, I think it's, again, the similarities are so much stronger and more unifying, and that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a need here in the US, but the situation, in my opinion, is much more dire when you go abroad, places like China and um, Africa and South America. So I really appreciate and are happy to see that you are also heading towards that direction.
Yep.
So, how does AbleThrive make it easier for individuals with disabilities to access resources that will help them lead a productive and fulfilling life while living with a disability? Can you give listeners a vivid example of how that works?
Sure. So like I mentioned, a bit, I already kind of explained a bit about how the platform works. And so the goal in that is to show, like, to me, so many solutions and so much information is already out there. And a really important thing for me was to not reinvent the wheel. And so rather than AbleThrive trying to redo everything that everybody else was doing it and try to do it better, instead it was, how can we foster collaboration? Because people are doing so many amazing things, but not enough people who could benefit know that they're there. And so really that's the core of what we're looking to do, is making it easier for people to learn from others, especially if they're isolated geographically, or they, maybe isolated with accessibility, can't leave their home as easily. Like, I don't want that to be a block for people to accessing the things that can help them understand what's possible.
And how do you measure progress at AbleThrive?
So because we're a web platform, we have some of the easy avenues like Google Analytics, like, are people showing up on the website? Are they staying on the pages they go to? And similar on social media, they track all of those numbers. Also, we just get a sense of how our community grows. Also, this past year, we did a lot of conversations with the community to inform our next steps. And I think it's not necessarily a metric that we track, but it was something that helped us understand what we could be doing better. So between conversations and the digital numbers, we try to make sure that that's all moving in a positive direction.
That's true. With it being a digital platform, there is a very, black and white way to measure that. So, in your personal opinion, what has been the biggest contribution your service has made to the lives of individuals with disabilities? Can you once again, give us a specific example so that we can picture that change?
Yeah, so one example, since you brought up the dancing video from the wedding, like, in the wake of that, because that got shared as much as it did, it got quite a bit of traction. So that could have been any video on AbleThrive, right? Like, the concept is that we shared something through our channels that ended up, I had multiple people write to me to say, okay, I thought forever, I thought I would never dance at my own wedding. I thought I would never dance at my son or daughter's wedding. I thought, I had multiple messages like that after. And it was obviously something as seemingly simple as dancing. But I think that's one small example of like, ideally we're having impacts like that, like in a variety of ways. Like, I had a mom write me once. Her adult son had a spinal cord injury, and he had read an article about a quadriplegic mom even. But because he saw that, the mom wrote me and she said, well, my son assumed he would never be able to be a parent, and now he knows that's a possibility. So like things like that are just, you can't, that they're priceless. But that's the kind of thing, it's like they might find it out some other way, but I don't like to risk that. So anything we can do to help people see things that they had no idea were possible, that will lead them in a direction that will enhance their quality of life, like those are the contributions that mean a lot.
No, that's a great example. So moving on to business advice, what advice do you have for people who are starting their own business? what do you wish that you would have known in the beginning when you were starting AbleThrive?
I think two things. One, make sure early on you're finding the people who really believe in what you're doing and who you can talk to when things are difficult, who aren't just going to tell you it's too big or too hard or going to fail. And the second thing I would say is there is a ton you can do before you're spending money. So Facebook groups are a great way to test ideas, or you can build up, if you have an idea for an app or a website, you can draw it on paper and get feedback before you're paying any money to develop it. Now this is over 12, 13 years of reflection, but there were times that, we probably built too much without involving the community, as opposed to now, like we're working on these education modules. We haven't spent a dime yet. Like we're actually just pulling together the information and then testing them very frequently with the community before we invest in any massive changes that would actually take resources. So especially when you're just starting out, where you don't, before you quit your job, before you spend your life savings, have you talked to enough people in the community, and have you tested things with people? Because sometimes no matter what you think, there's always more to learn. And once you start talking to 10, 20 people, things become a lot more clear.
No, I found what you said to be really, really insightful and really helpful, because, I started my own company 6 months ago, and being in these early stages, and not knowing very many people that have gone through this route, it's really, it's really helpful to hear these things. Yeah. So I see that you reached over 60,000 people around the world in your first year, and you're building, and then you started growing and building new sites and scaling up. What have been some effective methods that you've used to grow and scale thus far?
I have to say we can cheat a little bit, because technology does make it a lot easier. We don't need the same manpower in the same way as like boots on the ground. So we do use that to a huge degree. So for example, our scaling has been able to be like, because everything's in English, well, why not try to reach Canada? Why not try to reach United Kingdom? Why not try to reach, Australia, places that, where can the internet carry us? I'm still a relationship person. So even though, like AbleThrive is shared in a spinal cord injury hospital in Australia, I've never been there. I never met the person in person, but because of technology, we were able to connect, and I was able to demo the website online, and, and so, I mean, that's been basically trying to leverage what we have, because the internet can reach anyone. And we can make some progress in English internationally before we, again, jump too far and try to do every language everywhere. That's a thing where you can dream that big, but when you're trying to just get to the next step, you got to start somewhere and then get to the next one. It's good to have the long-term vision, but if I was trying to do everything in every language now, we haven't figured out yet the ways to make it really click the right way in English, or we're still refining that, So, and then for scale, it's just continuing to figure out what do people need and how can we fill that gap. And then that way, we hope that it can spread also organically a bit too, because people are using it and benefiting from it and then passing it on.
Yeah, I think, yeah, me too. I have lots of different things going on my website, but I think it's like what you were saying earlier, even though the internet enables us to do a ton of different things at the same time and reach a ton of different types of people at the same time, if we want to make lasting impacts and lasting progress, you really have to do it one step at a time and one platform at a time. So what about in terms of tips on managing people? As the CEO of a relatively new company, what is your best tip on managing people?
I think it's two words that come to mind are authenticity and communication. And that's kind of the foundation of trust. So if people trust that you're doing things for the right reasons, you're there because, people can trust your motivations. That's huge, because they understand why you are doing what you're doing. And I just think that that's great. And being authentically driven or authentic about why you're doing something is really beneficial. And then communication is huge, because if, um, and I can't say that this is just from my learnings. I'm not like a manager of the year, right? But I do think, just in terms of dealing with other human beings, you have to be clear about expectations. You have to be accountable yourself as well as hold others accountable. So it's an ongoing, learning journey for me to figure out how to do that effectively. But I think, so long as, if there are misunderstandings, if you have a foundation of communication, you can address it before it becomes a bigger problem.
What's been the biggest challenge in terms of managing people?
Well, our entire team is remote, so that's a challenge. We don't see each other every day, so setting, it's difficult because you're more on your own, so you might have a harder time like setting up times to talk, or you might work at different hours. So that's a challenge. It's completely doable, and for us, it's like that. There's no other solution. Like, it's our best option. But it's interesting to figure out kind of how to set some semblance of a work life for people who have never met in person.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So thinking into the future now, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing individuals with disabilities as a whole today, and how can we overcome these challenges?
Again, I'm speaking from my kind of observations, right? Not speaking for the community, but just from what I see, I guess from my perspective, not having a disability, and then sometimes being around other people who don't have disabilities, and that has allowed me to hear some of the things that they think, because they'll tell me these things if no one's around, no one with a disability is around. And sometimes it highlights for me some of the ingrained assumptions and fears and discomfort that some people have. And I don't know that I can say what's the biggest problem. I think that's very difficult to articulate, or to assume, but this is just something that I've observed specifically from my position, that I find to be, it's like, if someone is really awkward around someone in a wheelchair, and then someone in a wheelchair shows up to interview with that person for a job, like, is that person in a wheelchair going to get a fair shot? And it's not that the job hiring person is evil. They just are falling prey to, societal stereotypes and the lack of representation and all the issues that have arisen in that way. But again, of course, it's like, physical accessibility is a huge issue, because if you can't get even in the building, then how can you do whatever you're trying to do? Access to work, the ability to work without losing your benefits, like being able to access healthcare, education, like there's a lot. So for us, like, obviously there's a lot of problems and a lot of people doing incredible work to fix them. For us, we're just focused on, can we make sure more people with disabilities and their family members, like, see disability as not a barrier to living a fulfilling life, and ideally get more people joining these fights so that more change can happen more quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great response. Yeah, thank you so much for being so open and candid and very insightful. So that was our last question. And thank you for taking time. I realize that you're a busy lady. I'm sure tons going on your end, but I appreciate you for coming on to the show and being so genuine and candid with your responses.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. All right, on with your busy day.
All right.
Now, Brittany and I would love to hear from you. What is your favorite song to dance to? Do you like this video? If so, be sure to follow us on social media and sign up for our email list on our website, where the best conversations happen. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive, because they will make the world a better place for everyone. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.